Hi everyone, it's Ann from River City Soapworks, and I am following up with you today with the cutting video of the beach themed soap that we made just yesterday, in fact. And I've decided I'm going to call this South Pacific. And I'm really happy with the way that my top turned out. We have some peaked swirls here of white from titanium dioxide and hydrated chromium green and ultramarine blue. And I purposely kind of swirled and peaked them to try to look like kind of ocean waves and peaks in the ocean. So I don't know if you can see that, but pretty pleased with how that turned out. So I made this in the 5-pound silicone mold from Nurture Soap Supplies. I already took it out of the wood mold, and now we have the silicone, and it looks like it's pulling away really nicely from the edges. Sometimes you get lucky with silicone molds and sometimes you don't. If you have trouble with your silicone molds pulling away and pulling away some of the soap, you either need to let it cure, or set up a little bit longer, or you need to add some sodium lactate to your recipe, or you can pop this in the freezer for, depending on the size of the loaf, maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and that'll help with the unmolding. But this looks like it's coming out pretty good, so I'm going to go ahead and take it out. If you recall, when we made this recipe yesterday, the fragrance oil gave me some trouble, primarily with my bottom layer, my tan layer. It accelerated trace really fast, and I had a little bit of ricing, but I was able to stir through it pretty well, and it was still pretty workable. But the tan layer on the bottom was definitely the most difficult. But you can see it came out pretty clean, so I'm excited to cut this and see how it looks. So let me get my cutter. So today I'm going to be cutting this with my multi-bar cutter. I got this from Bud Hafner, who has an Etsy shop, and he creates all of his multi-cutters by hand. The craftsmanship is just outstanding. It is just a beautiful soap cutter, and you just line up your soap along this edge and bring the top down, and you have perfectly uniform bars. For the longest time I was using just a single cheese slicer, which really does work well in a pinch, and I used that for a few years, in fact. But the trouble is that sometimes you don't get uniform bars. They're pretty close, but they're not exact. And as my production increased, I needed exact size bars for soap boxes and such. So I love my Bud multi-cutter, so I highly recommend that. So let's go ahead and get started. So there's a couple options with this. As you can see, my ends are pretty clean, but I still usually like to kind of take off just a little bit of the edge. So I'm just going to trim off a little, what I call the butt of the soap. And it's really just a sliver. Just a sliver, but that way I have a nice clean edge to work with. So I'm just going to take my soap loaf and butt it all the way up to the edge. And you'll want to keep a paper towel handy, because before you do a second cut you'll want to wipe off your strings. So just make sure that's perfectly lined up, everything looks good. And I'm going to bring my cutter down, make sure my wires are tight. You want to make sure that your wires have kind of a high pitch to them, and they are in fact guitar strings, so you'll want them to have a high pitch to them. That's how that you'll know that they're tight, but you don't want to over tighten them. So I'm going to bring this down in one smooth motion. There we go. And now you want to keep this down before you take off the others. So for a soap that was not cooperating while we were making it, I am really pleased with what I'm seeing. I have my tan layer. It gave me a little bit of trouble, seized up pretty quickly, gave me a little bit of ricing, but it looks like it set up very nicely. And then I did just really a spoon plop of the ultramarine blue, hydrated chromium green, and white. And I like that. So I think we have a pretty good effect. It smells really good. As I mentioned before, this is the beach type fragrance oil from Crafter's Choice, and it is supposed to be a dupe of the Beach by Bobbi Brown. Some people say it smells like suntan lotion. I pick up a little bit of that, but I also pick up just, I don't know, it smells like summer to me. It does smell like beach. I can tell, however, by looking at this, that I'm going to get, let me see if you can see. I'll bet if I come back here in a couple days, I'm going to have some soda ash on the top of these bars. I can see it just kind of starting to form. So I'm probably going to have to deal with that. That is just kind of an unfortunate reality. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But I have found that steaming the tops of my bars that do have soda ash really, really helps on cutting that down. So I'm really happy with this. You know, I was worried yesterday when I made this because it gave me a little bit of trouble. But I think it's set up really, really nicely. And then you can see this is my last bar for that piece, and this is where I made it a nice clean edge. I took the butt of the loaf off. So now I'm just going to wipe off my strings real quick, and we'll get the second part of the loaf. I used a 5-pound loaf mold, so it is longer than this cutter. And that's what another thing I like about this cutter is it doesn't have a closed cap on this side. Be careful when you're looking at multi-cutters if you're shopping around. Some of them will have an end cap on both sides, which then limits the length of the log that you can put in there. And I needed one that was definitely, you know, provided the end cap here to butt the one edge up to, but then was open on this end for longer loaves. So let's go ahead and put what we have left in the cutter. It looks like it fits in there just perfectly. It literally took it all the way to the edge. So I'll decide if I want to sell this bar. It looks like it's in really good shape. Sometimes the edges, the butts of the loaf get a little, spots on them or speckles from the mold, or they just don't break away from the mold very clean. This is a really nice clean edge, so I might be able to go ahead and use that. But as I said, I think I'm going to call this either South Pacific or Pacific Waters. I haven't yet decided, but something like that, because it reminds me, when you look on a map, and you see all that aqua blue. It reminds me of that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Stay tuned. By the time I have this video posted, I will have made my decision. And then if you do have a multi-cutter, just don't forget, before you pack it away, you'll want to clean the soap off of your strings, and you'll also want to loosen your strings at the end of each day after you're finished with your cuts. Can't say enough about this cutter. You saw how nicely it cut. Can't say enough about how pleased I am with these soaps and how they turned out. Really, really, really happy with that. Thanks so much for joining me today as I show you the end result of my ocean themed soap, and I'm glad that you were able to watch the cutting video of this. If you haven't seen it, I have also posted the making of this soap. But I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe to my channel for updates, and happy soaping!